So I'm Nikki and I'm the Communications Officer for the Isles of Scilly Wildlife Trust. The Trust is a locally run conservation charity and we're actually responsible for more than 50% of the islands. So that includes all of the uninhabited islands and then the coastal strips on the inhabited islands apart from Tresco and our wetland sites as well. And that responsibility is basically any conservation land management tasks that need to be carried out across the islands. This time of year, our rangers, we have a small team of rangers and they're out and about in the field, and their main priority right now is path cuts. So they're starting the path cuts around the islands. We keep 63 miles of paths clear around the islands throughout the year, and that entails quite heavy grunt work on their part because it's all done by hand on foot because we can't get any big machinery around the islands. So yeah, they keep 63 miles clear and they're doing their first path cuts this week, but by the end of August they will be up to either their fourth or fifth path cuts around the islands. So this week's cuts are concentrating on our uninhabited islands. So we have Tean, St Helens and Sampson primarily, where people do actually visit, but they're really prime bird breeding grounds as well. So in order to keep visitors away from the bird breeding areas, we create the paths which kind of steer people around the islands and keep them away from where the birds are nesting. But there's always a caveat with that because nature does its own thing. So despite where we think the birds are going to nest and where they should be nesting, they don't necessarily always follow that advice from us. So we do always ask people to just be aware when they are visiting, particularly our uninhabited islands, of signs of disturbance and making sure that they're not disturbing our breeding seabirds. Scilly is really, really important for seabirds. We are nationally, regionally and internationally important for breeding seabird populations. So we have the common species that sort of people tend to see and maybe not like very much, like the gulls. So we have herring gulls, lesser blackback and greater blackback gulls. We've actually got more than 10% of the UK's breeding population of the lesser blackback gulls, so it's a really important breeding population of them. We then also have the cute fluffy ones that everybody likes and wants to see, like the puffin. So hopefully people do get to see puffins, but they're amazingly quick and they're amazingly tiny. So I've recently written a blog specifically around seeing puffins because we get asked the question quite a lot. And the problem with puffins is they are very small. People think because they see them on TV that they're penguin sized because they haven't got anything to equate them to, but no, they're about this big, and they can reach speeds of about 55 miles an hour when they're flying, so incredibly quick too. So it's usually a black blob that you see. It's kind of whizzing around all over the place, but they're quite characterful as well. So if they decide that they like you, they will do flybys when you're out on the boats and stuff, so you do get a pretty good look at them. Some of our other important species are the shag. So we're nationally important for breeding shag populations, and we've actually just recently in the last year had a special protection area increase around the islands. So they've actually enlarged the SPA around the islands, and that's primarily for the shags and their breeding and feeding as well, because it now covers their water-based activities as well as their land-based activities. We also have, or we had until recently, a breeding kittiwake population. They've kind of yo-yoed quite a lot and not been very successful in the last few years. We're not entirely sure what the reasons are for that, but hopefully our ongoing seabird survey work will help us to find out. So yeah, our breeding kittiwake population, again, they were very small. They've moved around the islands a fair bit, but they now seem to have settled on the east coast of Gueux, which is out of the way of people. But sadly, they haven't been successful in the last few years, despite having nests and eggs within nests. They've been predated on. So some of our work that we did a couple of years ago, we actually discovered who was taking the kittiwake chicks. We had cameras set up, which was really fascinating. Because people quite often blame the gulls. They've got a bad rap. The gulls are taking the kittiwake chicks. And it actually turned out that it wasn't the gulls, and the gulls were actually supporting the kittiwakes in fending off predators. And it was crows that were coming in and taking chicks, but the prime suspect was our peregrine falcons that are nesting out on Annet. and they were making daily trips into Gew and taking at least one kittiwake chick a day to obviously feed their own chick. And it's just like protected species, we can't do anything about that, unfortunately. But it's amazing that the peregrines are doing so well. So as well as the kittiwakes, we've also got my favourite, which is the fulmar. The northern fulmar, and they've actually only been breeding within the islands since around about the 1940s, 1950s. They're fairly new to sort of this area, but they're doing really well and they're absolutely fantastic. So yeah, Scilly is incredibly important for breeding seabirds, and we'd like to keep it that way. It's not just the marine life that's really important around the islands, it's also our land habitats as well, the terrestrial areas of Scilly. And we've got some incredibly important and special species over here as well. And the work that the rangers do help to promote that, restoring habitats and actually increasing habitats for certain species as well. Many of them are plant species, so a lot of people are kind of a bit turned off by plants, they're a little bit boring. But actually some of the ones in Scilly are really fascinating. And as you would expect, being on islands, they're also incredibly tiny. So they're the kind of plants that you need to get down on your hands and knees and kind of put your nose right in the dirt to be able to see them. So we have the dwarf pansy, which only grows in Scilly in Great Britain.